My boss took all the credit for my invention, but my dad told me to fight. Now they owe me $2.4 million and a public apology. They say the best ideas are the quiet ones, the ones that sit in your head for months, growing like weeds until they won't stay silent any longer. That's what it felt like for me. My name's Cassidy, I'm 25, and until a few weeks ago, I was just another invisible junior developer at Aldrin Systems in Phoenix, Arizona. The kind of company that loves its own aesthetic, bare brick walls, ergonomic chairs, overpriced snacks nobody eats, and kombucha taps nobody asked for. No one there really saw me. I wasn't one of those Ivy League resumes with a Stanford zip code or a Berkeley badge of honor. I came from late-night coding sessions in a half-broken apartment while working at a diner to cover tuition. I taught myself more from debugging cheap freelance projects than I ever did in a classroom. When Aldrin hired me, I got the message loud and clear: move fast, stay quiet, and don't expect your name on anything unless you screw it up. For the first 6 months, I did exactly that. I fixed broken loops, cleaned up rushed code from people twice my salary, and survived mostly on vending machine protein bars in silence. Every bug I fixed went unnoticed. Every suggestion I had died before the room ever quieted enough to hear it. So I stopped trying to speak and started building something on my own time. Nights, weekends, stolen hours during lunch. I kept everything on a private repo and a beat-up notebook I carried like it was made of gold. I called the project Pulse. It started simple, a concept for connecting independent creators with audiences using passive data instead of direct input. No fake likes, no engagement metrics, just patterns, invisible lines between what people loved and what they never said aloud. I wanted to build something that helped artists find their people without chasing algorithms they didn't understand. Nobody at Aldrin knew I was working on it. Why would they? I wasn't on the radar for anything besides grunt work and weekend bug squashing. That changed during a meeting I wasn't even supposed to speak in. We were in the war room, glass walls, bad coffee, and fake urgency. The project was called Echo Rise, though it didn't really exist yet. The last team lead had just quit, and the VP in charge, Reed, was pacing like a man auditioning for a panic attack. He clapped once, sharp and hollow. "We need ideas," he said, loud enough to make people flinch. "Something bold. Something that gets us out of this hole." He looked around the room like he'd forgotten half our names. No one spoke. Not a single person even looked up from their screen. Something in me cracked open, just a little. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way Reed didn't even glance at my side of the table. I don't know what came over me, but I slid the notebook out of my bag, cleared my throat, and started to talk. I pitched the interface first. Minimal, adaptive, fully integrated with existing platforms without scraping user input directly. Then I walked through the learning model, how it would build user maps in real time, silently learning patterns instead of demanding feedback. I explained how it would benefit creators, offering real-time insight about who was responding to their work and why, without making them feel like marketers or analysts. I didn't just throw out buzzwords. I had workflows, diagrams, test data, 6 months of stolen time, ready in under 6 minutes. For the first time in that room, Reed looked up. Not at the wall, not at his laptop, at me. He didn't say much, just leaned back and muttered, "That's not bad. That's it." For words. Later that day, he came by my desk and asked for my notes. Said he wanted to pass them along to some product folks for brainstorming. I handed him a copy, told myself I was being paranoid, and tried to believe it was a good sign. It felt like a door had opened, but the door didn't lead anywhere. I wasn't invited to the next few meetings about Echo Rise. My access to the dev folder vanished. People I hadn't seen before were suddenly in late-night Zoom calls I never got links for. The notes I gave Reed disappeared. Not a single word from him for 3 weeks, except once, when he stopped by my desk to ask a vague question about a logic loop I'd written. He smiled like nothing was strange, like I should be grateful he remembered my name at all. Then came the announcement. It dropped as an all-company email with one of those bold subject lines that scream celebration whether you care or not. Echo Rise selected as finalist for Horizon Tech Breakthrough Award. There was a photo of Reed shaking hands with a panel judge, all smiles and tailored suits. The email ended with this sentence: "This project wouldn't exist without the leadership and vision of Reed." Not a single mention of me. Not even a team effort, not. Just Reed, Visionary, genius, founder of something he didn't even know existed 6 weeks earlier. I must have read it a dozen times. It felt like reading my own obituary, except I was still alive and no one had noticed. At the awards dinner, I wore black and sat near the back. Reed wore a navy suit and confidence like cologne. When he stood on stage holding that glass trophy, he said, "Innovation begins with listening." Sometimes the best ideas come when leaders know how to give them room to grow. The room erupted in applause. I clapped too, barely, mostly to keep from screaming. Afterward, he caught me by the elevators, drink in hand. "You're still young, Cassidy," he said, resting a hand on my shoulder like he thought that meant something. "There'll be other chances. Keep building." I smiled the way I'd been taught, tight-lipped, grateful, forgettable. But what he didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that 6 months ago, before I ever mentioned Pulse, I filed for a provisional patent. Under my name. On my own time. I hadn't planned to use it. Back then, it was just a precaution. Something to make me feel like I mattered. Like I was protecting something only I could see. But now? Now it was a fuse, waiting to burn. And Reed had no idea how close he was to the spark. The night after the awards dinner, I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch, lights off, laptop glowing, scrolling through comments under the company's post like I was watching someone else live my life. Everyone loved Echorize. They called Reed a genius, a forward thinker, a trailblazer in behavioral modeling. Tech blogs were already speculating on partnerships, funding rounds, future patents. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry, not in the dramatic, throw a glass across the room way. It was more like a slow, suffocating compression in my chest. I had built something with care and intent, and now I was watching it be worn like a borrowed suit by someone who didn't even understand how the seams were stitched. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was Malia. We'd been best friends since I was 19, and she was 2 years into law school. She was the one who had first explained what a provisional patent was, back when Pulse was just a scattered idea and I was too broke to afford anything but ramen and ambition. Her message was short. "Tell me that's not the thing you showed me in January." I stared at the screen for a while before typing. "It's exactly that. Same framework, same interface, same logic tree." Less than a minute later, she called. I could hear the urgency in her voice before she even said a word. "Cassidy, that patent application you filed, it's dated, timestamped, and logged under your name. If what you're saying is true, this isn't just corporate sleaze. It's legal territory now. We're not talking stolen vibes or vague inspiration. We're talking potential infringement." I remember pacing the room, my bare feet sticking slightly to the cheap hardwood floor as I processed what she was saying. I hadn't signed an intellectual property clause when I joined Aldrin. There was no contract about side projects. I double-checked back when I filed, just to be sure. Malia's voice dropped an octave. "You might be holding the pin to a grenade. The only question now is whether you're ready to pull it." I didn't answer. Not then. Instead, I did what I always did when I felt uncertain. I worked. I spent the next week combing through the internal version control logs, mapping every update made to the Echorize code base. I mirrored them with the progression in my private Git repository. Same structure. Same flow. Some names changed, a few variables refactored, but anyone who knew how to read code would see the truth. It wasn't just inspired by Pulse. It was Pulse, rebranded, repackaged, and reassigned. Every night, I backed up files to an encrypted drive. I logged every timestamp, every code snippet that matched my original drafts. I wasn't angry anymore. I was meticulous. I was methodical. I didn't want to destroy anything. I just wanted credit for what I had built. The credit they had ripped from my hands like I didn't matter. Then came the press release. A strategic partnership between Aldrin and a company called Lamora, one of those global media powerhouses with more influence than actual humanity. The deal was rumored to be worth somewhere in the 8-figure range. The headlines were unbearable. Echorize set to revolutionize audience mapping. Reed's Vision secures landmark contract. There were photos of him on stages, doing interviews, casually mentioning the years of work that led to this moment. Years of work I had done on a second-hand laptop during overnight shifts. That was the moment something in me shifted from patience to precision. I opened my inbox and drafted the email. Subject line: Intellectual property violation, Pulse framework. I copied Malia, included documentation, the patent application number, and a message that was short but clear. This message serves as formal notification of an ownership conflict related to the Echorize platform. Attached are records of the original code base, architecture drafts, timestamp development logs, and provisional patent filing documents. I request a full review and immediate acknowledgement of my claim. Cassidy. Hitting send didn't feel triumphant. It felt inevitable. Like tossing a match toward a pile of dry leaves and watching the wind carry the flame somewhere you couldn't predict. By noon, my access badge was disabled. I got a voicemail from HR asking me to come in for a meeting to clear up a misunderstanding. The tone was rehearsed, clipped, almost sympathetic, but only almost. That same afternoon, Malia made a quiet call to one of her contacts at a regional tech blog. Not a story, not yet. Just a question. Had they heard anything about a rising app built by a junior dev, now fronted by someone else? Within 24 hours, the story was out. No names, just whispers. Anonymous developer files patent claim on award-winning innovation. The blog didn't say much, but they said enough. Enough to make people at Aldrin start watching each other a little more carefully. That night, I got a text from Reed. "You've made your point. Let's talk. Just you and me. No lawyers." I stared at that message for a full 5 minutes before turning off my phone. He still thought this was personal, that I wanted revenge or attention. He didn't realize I was long past caring about his reputation. He thought I'd be satisfied with a private apology or maybe a line in some buried blog post. But he didn't understand what he'd stolen. It wasn't just an idea. It was proof that I had something valuable inside me. And he'd taken it, publicly, like it had never belonged to anyone but him. That same night, Malia sent me a message in all caps. They just hired outside counsel. That means they're worried. And then she followed it with something else. It's starting. I thought things would slow down once the story broke. Maybe I'd have time to breathe, to think, to sleep without my stomach folding in on itself. But instead, everything got louder. Reporters started circling like they smelled blood. My inbox turned into a war zone, half full of strangers telling me I was brave, the other half insisting I was a liar who should be grateful for a paycheck. Most messages blurred together, but one stood out. It came from Julian, a senior engineer who had been with Aldrin for years. We weren't close. I only remembered him because once, late on a Friday, he'd stayed behind to help me untangle a UI bug while everyone else left for rooftop drinks. His message was short, but it hit like a punch. "Cassidy, I don't know if this helps, but I saw your name removed from the commit logs last month." It didn't feel right. I didn't say anything then. I'm saying it now. If you need someone to back you up, I'm here. I read it 3 times before it sank in. This hadn't been a misunderstanding or lazy documentation. They hadn't just forgotten to include me, they had intentionally erased me. The code I wrote was still there, just scrubbed of every fingerprint that might tie it back to me. I'd suspected it. Now I had proof. I sent it to Malia immediately. Her response came fast. That's what we needed. We build the timeline next. We spent the next week assembling the story like a machine. We pulled version histories, commit diffs, timestamps, archived Slack messages, prototype screenshots. Every meeting I'd been excluded from, every code branch that mirrored mine, every day that passed without my name mentioned in a single documentation file, we stacked them in order like a wall. Then someone else came forward. I never met her in person, but she worked in marketing and messaged me from a burner account. She'd seen emails, screenshots, messages where my name was specifically removed from the project briefs before they went public. She didn't want to testify, not yet, but she wanted me to know I wasn't imagining it. Then came the email that cracked it all open. It was leaked anonymously, forwarded through a chain so tangled no one could trace its origin. It was from Reed to one of the executives at Aldrin. A single sentence that burned itself into my brain the second I read it. "She's not ready for credit. Let's be strategic and keep her name off the press until funding is locked." I sent it to Malia without a word. She didn't need me to explain. There was nothing left to explain. They hadn't just stolen my idea. They had done it with planning, with intention, with full knowledge of what they were taking. I wasn't some ghost in the system. I was a threat, so they erased me before I could speak. The next morning, a new hashtag started trending. Hashtag credit the creator. Suddenly, people were paying attention. Not just to me, but to all the others. Junior developers, designers, engineers. People who had their work stripped from them by the exact kind of people who wore nice suits and called themselves visionaries. 3 more former Aldrin employees reached out that week. One had been in HR and said she'd been told to ignore complaints like mine. Another said they'd seen early drafts of Pulse in a Slack thread months before it was renamed Echorise. They remembered the sketches. They remembered it wasn't Reed's. Malia started getting calls from media outlets, bigger ones this time. Tech Chain, Inside X, even a legal podcast that wanted to do a special episode on what they were now calling the Aldrin case. It wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. It was a message, and Aldrin could feel it. That's when the offer came. It was an email from Aldrin's legal department, short and clean, filled with neutral language that tried too hard to sound fair. They were offering a settlement, a number I won't repeat, but it was 7 figures. It came with 3 conditions: sign the NDA, take down my public claims, and issue a statement retracting my accusation. Not legally admitting I was wrong, but something that sounded close enough. I remember staring at that email for a long time. They didn't want to apologize. They didn't even want to talk. What they wanted was silence, bought and packaged with a bow. They wanted this to disappear before anyone else looked too closely. I called Malia that night. "They're trying to pay me to vanish," I said. "That number is high," she replied. "But so is the cost of silence." I knew what I was supposed to say. Take the money. Move on. Pretend it never happened. But I couldn't. Not because I wanted revenge. Not even because I wanted the spotlight. I just couldn't stomach the idea of letting them get away with it while dozens of others like me stayed silent because no one ever fought back. "No deal," I told her. "We go public. Full documentation. All of it." She didn't hesitate. We filed the lawsuit Friday. And just like that, the real fight began. The day we filed the lawsuit, it felt like the world tilted just slightly. Not in a dramatic movie score kind of way, but in that quiet, irreversible shift where you know something small just triggered something huge. Malia and I submitted the full case file at 9:12 a.m. Evidence logs, witness statements, side-by-side code comparisons, the patent documentation, and every internal message we had managed to gather. No one could claim it was speculation now. This was real, and we had names, dates, and files to prove it. By noon, the headline dropped. Former developer sues Aldrin Systems for IP theft and fraudulent attribution. They used my name this time. Not anonymous. Not alleged. They said it plainly. Cassidy had built the foundation, and Aldrin had claimed it as their own. I braced myself for the fallout. I expected it to be bad. I just hadn't expected it to hit so fast. Within 24 hours, Aldrin's press team released a statement full of polished words that meant absolutely nothing. They respected innovation, they said. They valued every voice, they said. And then came the phrase that made me laugh out loud alone in my apartment. "We are committed to resolving this misunderstanding amicably." I read it 3 times. I wasn't sure if it was stupidity or arrogance that made them use the word misunderstanding after scrubbing my name off their project roadmap and pitching it as someone else's work. But either way, they weren't controlling the story anymore. The real blow landed the next day when Lamora, the media company Aldrin had partnered with, sent out a public statement of their own. They were pausing the deal pending a full internal review. I received a direct message from their president, someone named Nolan, who said, "Cassidy, I reviewed your patent myself. I had no idea. We're not moving forward unless this is resolved with full transparency." That was the moment Aldrin panicked. It didn't take long for cracks to show. Another senior dev resigned quietly. Then someone in legal. Then another anonymous leak landed in my inbox. This one wasn't about me. It was about others. Project notes from 2 years earlier. Product concepts attributed to people who had since disappeared from the company entirely. The pattern was bigger than me. I had just been the first to pull the thread. The court process started quietly, almost too quietly. The hearing room was nothing like I imagined. No grand wooden benches or dramatic gasps. Just muted tones, tired judges, and lawyers with too many folders. Aldrin tried to push the collaboration narrative. They claimed the idea was developed by a group. They said I had been part of the process, not the origin. Reed, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my rent, sat 3 rows from me and didn't look my way once. Until he took the stand. He smiled. He called me a promising young voice in tech. He said I had been present during early brainstorming, and that Pulse had inspired team-wide development. His voice was gentle, polished, even humble if you didn't know better. He played the part of the regretful mentor trying to smooth out a misunderstanding. Then Malia stood up and introduced Exhibit 43, a Slack screenshot from 3 months earlier. His exact words: "Let's keep Cassidy off the release docs until after funding. We need a clean face for investors." There was silence after that, the kind that vibrates in your chest and fills every corner of the room. The judge didn't say anything right away. just asked everyone to recess until the next day. I caught a glimpse of Reed as he walked out. His hands were trembling. Outside the courtroom, I said nothing. Malia handled the press, the reporters, the flashing phones. I just stood to the side, sunglasses on, watching people finally connect the dots. 2 weeks later, the verdict came. The judge ruled in my favor. The court awarded damages and legal fees, but that wasn't the part that mattered to me. What mattered was the formal correction, public, binding, and undeniable. My name was added to the patent records and authorship logs. Aldrin was ordered to retract Reed's award, update their internal documentation, and issue a public apology acknowledging me as the original creator of the platform now known as EchoRise. They had stolen it, but I had taken it back. I thought I'd cry. I thought maybe the relief would break me open. But when I heard the ruling, all I felt was breath, deep and full and still, like I had finally surfaced after holding it in for months. The consequences came fast. Aldrin's stock dropped 15% within a week. Their investor meeting was postponed indefinitely. Reed was put on administrative leave that quickly became permanent. Internal reviews were announced. An ethics panel was formed. Buzzwords started flying: transparency, accountability, culture rebuild. I didn't care about any of that. I cared about the messages from developers around the world, especially the ones who said, I thought I was the only one. Or, they did this to me too, but I didn't know how to fight back. That's when I realized something had changed. Not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been told they were lucky just to be in the room. After the ruling, people assumed it was over. Friends texted congratulations like I just won a lottery ticket. Strangers online called it inspiring, a victory for the underdogs, a sign that maybe the system could work if you screamed loud enough. But I wasn't celebrating. Not really. Because I knew this wasn't the end. It was just where the surface finally cracked wide enough for everyone to see what was underneath. I left Phoenix for a few weeks after the trial. Stayed with an old college roommate in Santa Fe, the kind of place where the quiet is thick and no one asks why you're hiding. I turned off every notification, stopped answering emails, and sat on a back porch drinking tea until the wind started to feel like mine again. It wasn't peace. It was repair. When I finally came back, I decided I didn't want to go back to working for anyone else. I didn't want to sit at someone else's table and hope they'd hand me scraps of credit when I'd already proven I could build the whole thing myself. So I launched something small, just me, a domain name, and a vision that felt bigger than anything I dared to imagine during my nights at Aldrin. I called it Signal Point, a consultancy for ethical innovation and IP protection. I wasn't trying to build an empire. I just wanted to build something where no one got erased, where someone could bring an idea to the table and leave with their name still attached. At first, it was quiet. But then former colleagues started reaching out, some to congratulate, others asking if I was hiring. One of the product designers from the EchoRise launch applied anonymously through the contact form. I knew it was her from the portfolio. I hired her anyway. People were tired. Tired of building brilliance in silence. And then something strange happened. About 3 months after the ruling, I got a plain envelope in the mail. No return address, no postmark I could trace. Inside was a single USB drive and a note written in handwriting I didn't recognize. 5 words, no punctuation. You weren't the first one. I stared at it for a long time before plugging it in. My heart was hammering so loud I could barely hear the fan on my laptop. The files were a mess: scans, emails, code drafts, presentation slides from old Aldrin decks dating back 5 years. Project names I'd never heard of. Ideas that had launched under different leaders. But the files all had one thing in common. They didn't start with those leaders. They started with names that vanished halfway through. Interns, junior devs, contract workers. Their names were there in early drafts, early Slack screenshots, and comments buried deep in the code. And then they were gone. Scrubbed. There was one name that showed up in every email chain, the same executive across all those projects. Not Reed. Someone higher. Someone who'd been at the company longer than I'd been out of high school. That night, I called Malia. We didn't just take down a thief, I said. We took down a mouthpiece. The real architect is still in the building. She was quiet for a second, then said what I was already thinking. Cass, if this is real, you might be sitting on something even bigger than EchoRise. I didn't want to believe it at first. I wanted to think Reed had just been a one-off, a cocky guy who thought ideas were free if you stole them fast enough. But now I knew better. This wasn't one man's ego. It was a system, a machine that ate ideas and spat out applause in the wrong direction. I didn't go public. Not yet. I didn't send the files to a journalist or post screenshots online. I just opened a clean folder on my desktop and titled it Case 2. Then I started reading. Every file, every buried comment, every document that carried someone's forgotten signature. Somewhere in the middle of those files, I found an old pitch deck. Half finished, barely formatted, just bullets and ideas. The creator's name was a woman I'd never met. Her email address was deactivated years ago. The product had been launched under someone else entirely, but the layout, the hook, the tech, it was hers. And I felt it in my gut, the same way I had when I saw Pulse for the first time with someone else's name on it. I wasn't the first. And if I didn't keep going, I definitely wouldn't be the last. A few days later, I got an alert on my phone. Reed had launched a podcast, a rebrand, a fresh image, the classic, I've learned from my mistakes, routine wrapped in vague apologies and fake wisdom. His first guest? A venture capitalist talking about the future of honest innovation. I watched for maybe 5 minutes before closing the tab. No one was listening. Not really. People had moved on. But I hadn't. I was still holding the thread, still tracing the line backward, still pulling names from silence and putting them back where they belonged. The ending everyone expected was the courtroom win. The headline. The photo of me smiling with a quote about perseverance. But that wasn't where the real story ended. The real story ended with a folder on my laptop, a USB in a drawer, and a question I couldn't ignore anymore. How many times had this happened before? And how many would it take before someone made sure it didn't happen again? I don't know where the next case will lead. I don't know who sent the drive or why they sent it to me. But I know what they meant when they wrote that note. You weren't the first one, and I won't be the last to speak.